Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Peter Samelson. Peter is an incredible magician, a magic producer, and a thinker in the world of magic, someone who's made quite a dent in the world of New York magic, as well as just has put out some really, really important thought in the world of magic. And this was a phenomenal conversation. We got to talk about some theater aspects that you can implement in your magic show. He gave us 3 questions that is actually 6 questions, but 3 questions that we can ask ourselves to make our magic better. We talk about imagery, we talk about Monday Night Magic, and so much more. This was a really fun episode, and I think you are going to enjoy it as much as I did. So here it is, a wonderful conversation with the one and only Peter Samelson. Peter, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
I am super, super pumped to have you. It was really, really exciting when, somebody reached out to me about saying like, hey, I think you really should have Peter on the podcast. And I said, hey, I think you're right. I think you're right. Because just that same week, Ben, him and I were working on a magic project together, reached out to you for theatrical and magic and technical advice. And I just thought, this would be so perfect.
That's your fabulous Tarbell project, if I'm not mistaken.
That's exactly right. The Tarbell Challenge. Yes. And we'll talk a little bit more about it if you want, because it's a ton of fun. But yeah, really pumped to get into this, to talk, theory, magic, theater, of course. Let's kind of rewind, go all the way back to the beginning. How did you get started in magic?
That's an interesting question. I mean, everybody gets asked this question. All magicians do, and they always, fall back on Vernon. I wasted the first 5 years of my life, and that's when I got started. But the truth of the matter is, I was actually interested in magic sort of early on as sort of a hobby, and I had a great aunt who at Christmas time gave me a magic set at the age of 6. And I opened it up and I was so disappointed that it was all tricks and not real magic that I actually gave it back to her and said, you got me the wrong set. So, and I kind of walked away from magic for a while and sort of gotten interested in it. I was growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Between Princeton, New Jersey and Ann Arbor, Michigan, I was a faculty brat. So I was kind of back and forth between those two. In Ann Arbor, there's a little place called the Blue Front. Blue Front was like a little store, sort of a corner cigar store. You find all sorts of stuff there. And of course, the Magic Tricks was right next to the pornography section. So I was immediately drawn to it. And so I sort of got interested in little pocket tricks and stuff. But when I was 11, in a school assembly, I specifically remember a magician coming to our school, elementary school, and doing serpent silk and doing a bunch of other stuff that I remember really specifically. And I ran home to my mom and I said, look, I'm grown up now and I know that magic isn't real, but I'm interested in learning how it works. And she had a friend at the university who had a book called Modern Magic, which, as we all know, was written in the 1890s, and which I've always loved. And I immediately took it home and started building things out of that book. Put together a couple of orange crates to make a little table, set up a basement little theater with curtains that would open and close. And I sort of started getting really seriously interested in that. Got my best friend at the time involved in it as well, and went on through junior high school and founded a magic club in junior high school. And then the high school I founded and sort of combined with other folks, and we formed a magic club in high school. And that was, the club just sort of grew and blossomed from there. And at the same time, pursuing a strictly, very highly demanding academic curriculum all through high school, and as well as doing theater and playing music and all that stuff. So early on, it was sort of this wide range, and my parents really supported me. I think it was partly out of guilt. My parents divorced when I was 4 years old. And so they sort of, Christmas, even though I come from a Jewish family, my father was not Jewish, although his mother was. His father was, and on my mother's side, my mother was. So it's this combination of this multicultural stuff, but it was all secular Judaism. And so we celebrated Christmas. And I would have 2 Christmases, which was great because I would go from one household to the other. Bonuses.
You started talking about the magic clubs that you started, and I think that one thing that really shows up in the world of magic is, I'm obsessed with the journey, right? And one of those turning points that's really exciting is when you discover other magicians, and when you discover that there's a community, maybe that there's conventions, maybe that there's a local club, different things like that. Talk to me about that, your discovery of other magicians, the working together, how you sort of started connecting with other people in the community and how that changed things for you.
That's a really great question. There's this whole, as we know, this whole little sort of sub community of the youth extensions of the magic clubs, and they're really important. The SYM, and sort of the junior section of the Magic Castle. And although I've never belonged, and I kind of hate to say this and admit this, but I've never belonged to a magic organization. Like I've never been a member of the IBM, and I'm never a member of the SAM, which I probably should apologize for. But joined the Magic Castle, obviously, and that's sort of my one main membership that I've maintained, and sort of by extension the Magic Circle. Growing up, this discovery that there's somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, as I know that 2 people working together on an idea is so productive. And there's so many more things you can do. Even if one person is hidden behind the scenes for one section and out front for the other, and you sort of swap times and turns on that. It's a very powerful opportunity to develop stuff. And what we did in high school was we found a mentor. We actually found an adult who would guide us through this stuff. He ended up I ended up dating his daughter in high school, but his name was Charles Rolfs. And Charles was a fairly well-known collector in Michigan, in the Ann Arbor area. And his basement was filled with the IBM, with a linking ring and MUM. He had just these vast this store of knowledge, and we would gather there. And not only would we have occasional lectures from out of town performers who would come through, he would help arrange for that and take us to see things, and arrange for us to go, for example, to Colon for the Abbott's get together, or down to the Columbus Magi Fest down in Columbus, Ohio at the time. These were things and he really guided us. So I think this idea of a guide, even if he's not an exact mentor, he still is there to help you see the things you need to see and sort of get your feet on the path of sort of erudition. I mean, to learn about the classics, and there would be books that he would make available to us to read and help us arrange for everything from business cards to flyers to really what we needed to understand, not so much totally towards marketing and business, which has never been one of my strong points. I have to admit that. I've kind of fallen into success more than actually driven myself to it. And yet he was there to sort of say, this is what's important. Let's take a look at what you're doing. Why is this that it works? What's the part of it? And, this was a time when Milky the Clown out of Detroit was running, and Don Allen would eventually pick up Magic Ranch out of Chicago, would come in, and you'd get to see these things. So there were all these influences that happened there. Wow. But I agree with you. It's like this group of people, this group of friends, and at a recent high school reunion that I went to, I actually ran into one of the co-founders of our magic club in high school. And it was so great to sort of connect up with him. And he also still interested in magic. Wow. It's just amazing how it sort of carried this arc through your entire lifetime.
Wow. Talk to me a little bit about how you chose to take this seriously. I know that theater played a role, in your life and in your studies, but when you decided to take magic seriously, how did you decide? I'm referring to as a career, even if you weren't ever like business, minded or focused, you still kind of have to say no to a lot of other options and paths and take this seriously, like mom, dad, I'm going to be a magician. So talk to me about kind of that. Exactly. and what steps you were taking, both in terms of like like what you did in terms of theater, but also how you chose and walk me through that decision-making process and when that happened.
I'm going to step you back a little bit before that because that'll inform the answer that I give you in a different way. My high school time was spent on AP courses in French and math and physics and English. And basically, I was pushing myself really hard. I played trumpet in the marching band, which you had to be in order to be in the band. And then you had to be in the band to be in the orchestra. And I played first chair in the orchestra. So you'd spend 3 months out of the year ruining your lip in a marching band and then try to recover it for the rest of the year. So this was a highly, and of course, I told you I was a faculty brat. So there was this real heavy obligation on me to do well academically, to the point that I maintained a grade book on myself. I've actually found this recently, and I track all the tests and all the papers and all the grading from all the way back to like 5th, 6th grade. I mean, it was an obsession just to see where things were. And this is the sort of thing that you have to keep sort of focused on at the time. For me, there was that. But so at the same time was the academic focus, there's also this focus on the arts. So that meant junior theater, and that meant music, and that meant sort of paying attention to the rest of the academic world as well as the artistic world. And Ann Arbor was great that way because it had a very strong cultural life. So I ended up going to Stanford and ended up majoring my first year in physics. So I was involved in an advanced physics program. And at the end of the first year, I really didn't like optics, and I didn't do well in optics. And I sort of took a look at this at the time, and I went, there are guys here who are really, really smart. There are guys for whom physics is something that just, they can make it sing. They can make poetry out of this. And I realized that I didn't have that talent. If I was going to be in something like physics, I'd be a day worker. I wouldn't do anything that mattered. And I'm also going to put this in historical context, which is this is sort of the late 60s. So war in Vietnam's going on. There's a big anti-war movement that's happened in the United States. There's sort of this music and sort of cultural revolution that's going on, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So this is all this environment's around me. And I'm looking at physics and going, you have to do something in your life that's going to be worthwhile. You got to matter. At the end of the day, at the end of your life, you need to look back and say, okay, I did something that changed the world in a better way. And I just felt that wasn't going to happen for me in physics. And so I started looking around. Like I dropped out of school for a semester until the draft got their claws into me and said, either go back to school or you go in the Army. And so I went back to school and I sort of went through philosophy for a while and then eventually realized that I wanted to go into performance. So I ended up studying theater and graduating in theater. And that theater means everything, everything from costume design to lighting and sets and movement and voice and all the stuff that was involved in that. So I moved from the academic to the performance stuff. End of college, I end up moving to New York. And my goal is to do theater in New York, to become relevant in theater.
You and everyone else in New York.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point, is of the union members, not just the general people in New York, but of the union members in New York when I arrived there, 90% of them made less than $5,000 a year in their chosen profession. And of the 10% that made more than $5,000 a year, 90% of them made that in commercials. And I went, I'm not particularly commercial material. And I didn't just spend my entire life and this time at Stanford training to become an actor in order to sell somebody else's
star in
product.
3 commercials about Wheaties or whatever.
Exactly. That said, I became a SAG member and I did commercials and the magic helped. And I did stuff for Panasonic and Kraft Dressing and a bunch of other stuff. And that paid me a lot of money. It got me health insurance for multiple years. And it was great. It was absolutely wonderful. But it's not what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do theater and make it theater. And I was struggling at this, and I was working for Holland America Cruises, working in their sales office, not as a performer, but selling cabin space to travel agents. And this was great. And we went to a Christmas party during that time period, and there was a magician performing at the Christmas party. And I've been doing magic throughout this whole time. I did magic even in college, although I'll talk about that in just a second. But so this guy was doing magic, and I went, oh, they do magic on cruise ships. I had no idea. What an interesting idea. And that sort of got locked away in my brain. So here I am in New York. I'm working at this. I get laid off because they laid off everybody. They had a big sort of oil crisis that happened, and everybody got laid off. They kept me on longer because I was cheaper. That had allowed me to get unemployment insurance. So I had 6 months of unemployment insurance, and I ended up taking that and starting to do magic, working at the Magic Townhouse in New York City. And I got hired to do this thing called Project Educational Theater, which was a children's show in which I played Geppetto or somebody. I played a number of smaller characters in this thing. This was a brilliant thing. Anyway, I'll tell you more about this because in the course of 10 weeks, we performed for 80,000 children based out of New Orleans. And I designed the magic for this stuff, and they would bust the kids in. And it was a brilliant business concept for this. So I came back from that, and I was still trying to do theater. We put together a summer theater company. My girlfriend, who moved to New York with me, who I actually followed to New York, was in theater, and a cousin of mine. We put together a summer theater company of 10 people up to the Adirondacks, booked our shows into towns, and found a place to house 10 people through a local museum in the Adirondacks. And we were doing these shows. And the first town that we were scheduled to perform in, they'd already had somebody come through and did the melodrama the year before. So we said, oh, well, what are we going to do? I said, we've got 10 people. Let's put together a magic show. I'll stage it. I'll write it. We'll do the whole thing. And we did that. And that went really nicely. And sort of from that, moving forward, I realized that if I couldn't make my living in theater, but I could make my living in magic, then I could combine the two of those, and I could make my magic theater, my theater magic. I could write my own material, write my own shows. We sold them to colleges and universities. My partner and I at the time went out and we did these 2-person shows where we would go out and she did mime and acting and I would do the magic and theater pieces.
Let me ask, did that feel like it was, giving up on your hope for theater, or did that feel like it was a marrying of the two things and, a peak, a crack at, to do something that will work? Which of those two was it?
I think it was really at the time, I was so pleased to be able to start performing and to find a way to do things that I cared about, to be doing material that I really liked. I was also doing real theater at the time. I did a bunch of stuff, and I did some theater in New York, and I did both improvisational theater, and we went down to so I was doing theater as well, and we worked with a bunch of other things. So there was this feeling of being involved in the theater scene in New York and bringing to it the ability to bring magic and illusion into a theatrical setting in a way that nobody else was doing, I thought, at the time, that there weren't a lot of people doing at the time. And then, of course, Henning hit New York. So I looked at this and I went, wow, this is not a giving up. This is not an abandonment.
This was a real positive. This was a positive.
Absolutely.
Switch.
Absolutely.
Great. It's funny. I'm thinking of, and not that this is what it is, but it's an interesting reflection. I'm thinking of a conversation that that I had with a magician, and it was on the way back from a gig, and I asked, like, why are you a magician, and he said something which was kind of sad, but he said, like, I would love to be a rock star, but I'm not very good at music, and I'm not funny either. I'm not a comedian, but if I can go on stage and do magic and people clap and they love it, and I get to, like, and I get to be a magician. And it's not that that's what it is, but it is interesting, that, like, there's a quote from Mario, the Maker Magician. I absolutely love this, and Mario says, be passionate about your dreams, but flexible about the details of those dreams. And that I really, really love. And I think that's what this is a reflection of, which is, like, when you zoom out, you realize, oh, wait, I am doing theater in New York at the top of my game, making a difference in an industry or whatever. It's just earlier me didn't know that this was even an option, and, was thinking about something else. So I really, really love that.
It was part of a journey. So I was telling you a little bit about being in the late 60s and what that was like. So I really got fed up with magic in that time period. Because I felt that the only focus that was happening for magic at the time was fooling people. That the only reason to be performing it was for people to be deceived and to be shocked by the fact that they were this, and to love not understanding how things work. And I looked around at the time and I went, I think the government is doing a better job of fooling people than I am. And the last thing I really want to do in my life right now is teach people to enjoy not understanding how things work. If that's the only reason I'm doing this, I'm not interested. And I sort of moved away from magic. I still designed for magic for theater shows in college, and I did a bunch of stuff like that, but I really wasn't taken with it. So moving to New York, I finally realized that, and this came out of sort of my interest in theater, which was, in physics, I could not really make a difference in the world. But in theater, if there are 300 people in the audience, and you move one person, you make a difference to one person in that audience where it's really a powerful impact, that makes it all worthwhile. And I realized that with the magic, that I had this opportunity to reach people in a way that many people in theater couldn't do. So it wasn't just a settling for this being a suitable alternative. It was like, wow. First of all, it satisfies my desire to do something that means something, to feel like I'm actually contributing in a way, to be selling my own thoughts and my political opinions that are out there, and to really try to reach people emotionally in a way that'll make a difference. So
you can write it, direct it, star in it, and put your face on the banner and get paid for it, versus in almost every other, theatrical thing in New York, only the best, get to have their face on it, and everyone else is reading someone else's lines. You know what I mean? And even then nobody gets the part they want. So, it is interesting. And, for me, very similarly, I think that, and I think a lot of magicians, that magic has opened up doors and allowed us to do things because it, carries all of these, there's uniqueness, there's, and all of these, all that we learn through magic theory is such important lessons that don't necessarily exist in all the worlds of theater, that we really get to share and make a difference on what things look like.
There's a man named Norman Lear. Norman Lear is still alive. He produced All in the Family with Archie Bunker. He founded People for the American Way. Died in the wool liberal. People always asked him, why did you do a show about Archie Bunker, about this right-wing guy, He said it was a comedy, and in comedy, you can say anything you want to as long as you package it between two laughs. And that stuck with me, and I thought, wow, what an idea. In magic, we have these little moments of amazement. It's not laughter always, but it's this moment in which people go, oh, this little gasp. So if you can say anything you want to in magic, as long as you package it between two moments that matter. And so the magic really provides us a way to do and to reach people and to touch people and to say things in theater that many other theatrical productions just can't do.
I did a little bit of reading and research in some of the things that are important to you in the world of theater and magic and the overlap. And I'd love to chat about some of them and maybe how magicians can internalize these things. And one of them that is something that I've thought about often, but really the moment that this became really important to me is when I read The Magic Rainbow, Tamari's The Magic Rainbow, and it's all about imagery. And he wrote some very convincing and intelligent pieces there about a lot of the hidden imagery that exists inside of magic, and I started realizing that, oh, right, it's just like the imagery that exists in stories. There's only so many different movie plots, like there's only so many different, because this imagery repeats and these ideas repeat. So I'd love to hear, I know you have a lot of thoughts on the world of like imagery in magic and how we can make that important. Talk to us a little bit about that. How can a magician focus, and why should they think about the images that they're giving to the audience?
Well, you think about it, and in advertising, images communicate. You think about visual ads that happen in there, and it's always about either showing things you don't want to have happen or showing things you do want to have happen. So you might see this guy surrounded by beautiful people, because he's walking out to his car and everybody's so amazed. So that imagery that connects in your brain at a subconscious level, or even moves into consciousness oftentimes when you're driven to take action, is this idea of an image that you can associate with or aspire to. I've always felt that magic is, which is why I was thrilled by the Tamari's book, that magic really is a three-dimensional, real-time moving image. It is what we do, a fantasy image. And images communicate this idea. I've always said, think about it, about what the images that you're creating. For example, if you take a woman and stick her in a box and stick swords through it or jam spears through it, what is that saying? What is the image?
Yeah, that's not meaningless. Those are not meaningless actions that you do, and like, even if the words that you say are about who knows what, you could be talking about, the amount of grains of sand on a beach, but you're still shoving a woman in a box and putting, sticks through it, and there's a picture, no matter what language they speak, no matter whether they follow along, see your jokes or hear your jokes, there is a picture that you're presenting, and and a natural idea, that's within that. I love that example.
Yeah. So, this is, I love the way you've encapsulated that, because that's exactly right. It almost doesn't matter what the script is around it. The image itself has a potency. On the other hand, the script itself becomes vital and can really change the experience for an audience. And I will give you an example out of real life on this. There's a piece I do called Heartstrings. And basically, it's gypsy thread with a script. It took me 7 years to bring it from concept to finality. For a number of reasons. The script took several years of working, and I worked with an improvisational director on this, and we'd work on this, and I'd go home and I'd transcribe it, and I'd come back and we'd edit it down until I had a script that I thought was important. Because in a script, you need to not only have imagery, but you need to have imagery that's not just personal imagery. You need universal imagery. Now, there may be limits in terms of when I say universal. It may not work everywhere in the world, because we're culturally inside an experience, and that shapes how we respond to the images. That said, those images become really important. So take a look at Gypsy Thread and ask yourself, what is it about? So I'll lay this out. It's one of the tools that I teach people, I give to people, and say, look, this is the best way to approach any bit of magic that you're trying to find script for. 3 questions: why, what, and who. They're real simple. And each one has 2 parts. Why? Why am I doing this? And the other part of that is, why should anybody care about this? And what is this about? And what would it look like if it was real magic? And then the who is, who's your audience and who are you in relationship to them? So in the what section of Gypsy Thread, you say, what's it about? And it's about something that's continuous. It's actually a piece of object that we use to bind things, to hold things together. Thread is not just used as a way of creating an image of connection point. It's actually a catenary if you hold both ends on it. So it's used to bind things. So, and its strength comes in its continuity. The reason that thread works is because it's not broken. So if we think about this as a connection, something that binds us together, and then if you break it, this idea is that all of a sudden it becomes less valuable. It becomes weaker. It becomes meaningless in many ways. It becomes painful if you're trying to hold something together and it gets broken. And then this idea of then putting it or restoring it, something that's been broken. So that's what it's really about. My friend Noah Levine got in touch with me once. He'd just been to a talk by neurologists, neuroscientists, and they had used my heartstrings piece, a video of it, in a seminar. And they showed the piece, and then they showed it with no audio. And then they showed it again with the audio. They said, which one works better? Does it work better without the audio, or does it work better with the audio? And the overwhelming response was that the audio made it a more powerful piece. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And one of those is because it contextualizes. And because, why should anybody care about it? Because the script is about connections between people. And it's a universal experience, which is you fall in love with somebody. And oftentimes those relationships get broken or torn apart, sometimes for the most trivial, seemingly meaningless reasons. So the script is, I once demanded great beauty. That's the break. This reliance on something that's surface, has no depth to it. You won't let me find out who I am. I mean, we've almost all felt that in a relationship, you can't really be yourself. You can't find it. And that can often break us apart. The third one is you're intellectually dull and your cooking's mundane. She said. And the she said is a really important element of that because it takes it from being this condescension, this male, judgment, and turns it around. It gets a laugh in the routine. And going back to Norman Lear, that laugh allows you to package inside that the meaning. And the funny thing is that in that scripting, by putting the laugh in that place where you've gotten personal, more personal, and then you laugh, it opens people up to experience it. It actually allows people to go deeper into the experience because you let them know that you're not being, so self-involved. You're not threatening to them, which is a problem with that. And the last one is, please don't go. I really need you. And so each of these is designed to go a little deeper, but you're giving people permission to go deep by letting them know that it's okay. They're safe. That's what the laughter is about at that point there.
One thing I want to ask about this, because what a phenomenal, that was a masterclass in just dissecting a sentence of a script. So thank you for that. But one thing I want to ask about, and this is not to direct people away from this, but I had a very long conversation, very wonderful one with Jamie Ian Swiss about what I'm about to ask you. And I know you mentioned before we started recording that you two are very, very close and have been for a long time. You mentioned a couple times, first you mentioned, magic was a way for you to actually, get your political views out into the world. And then you mentioned, that what you're expressing here is really important, is really wonderful to say. And sometimes I wonder, when I do my chop cup routine, do I really need to be expressing something about the universe and the way things are? And also, and similarly, I'm 26, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I'm reading books of people telling me you need to express your opinions about the world. And I'm like, what on earth can I possibly tell? What could I possibly say to the world? So I want to challenge you and maybe just hear your thoughts on, I have tried my whole life to embed in my magic views about the world, and it's clunky. I'm young. Doesn't make sense. I enjoy having fun with my audience and doing magic and sharing. And, there's imagery in there, but I talk about, I don't express, that something about the Democrats or whatever because the cards are red and not blue or something like that. So I'd love to know, just what's your take on that? Like the big question of what are you saying? Question. Do I have to say something?
That's a great question. That's a fabulous question, because it gets to the core of what we're doing and how to shape your performance. My partner, Karen, talks about, she's a very wise woman, and she talks about the fact that magic is metaphor, not illustration. So one of the things that you need to really be careful of in your scripting on this sort of thing, well, before I even get into that, Darren Brown talks about the fact that the script for performance sometimes is just in the performance. There is not, you don't need always to have a word script. There's this subtext. There's this script that lives beneath the surface, and which is where the imagery comes in, where you need to be able to look at what is the image that I'm creating here, and how does that work, and how does that play into the experience of somebody's happening. So there are times where you don't need to say anything, but in the performance, you are saying something. Example again from Darren. When Darren he talks about a handling for a levitating finger ring, where he borrows a ring from a woman. He says, does this ring have meaning for you? Does it have emotional importance and impact? And she said, no. She said, that one? She said, yes. So he'll choose something that has meaning, and he'll hook it up and then place it into her hand. And instead of having the agency, in other words, the magical powers, live with him, he invokes her memories of the emotional experience, gets her to focus on the memories of this and to envision it as this powerful ball of light around her heart, and the power sort of emanates out from her and down her arm, and she's doing that, and the ring moves. So the script in this is not anything about we're trying to lay meaning on this. The script is her causing the ring to move because of her powerful memory. So there are ways that you can get at script that is not script in the way we think about it. And this is Darren's point. I think it's really important. And this ties into the Tom Rees. What's the imagery of that? So now when you have other people around watching this, and they've seen you get her to feel this and to move this, and so it's her emotion and feeling that gets the attribution for the responsibility for moving the ring and floating it and getting to move up on that. So now you've created this experience. It's much more powerful than you going, hey, I'm a magician and I'm going to do some magic for you. Yeah. There are ways too where I'll give you another example. You talk about the power. You were talking about the chop cup, and you don't always have to have script around anything. Tony Slidini is, I think that we were going to, at some point, it becomes important to talk about mentors and people that are influences on you. I remember you've asked other people these questions. And I'd say that in many ways, Tony Slidini, I never studied with him, but I studied him. And he's one of the reasons that I got back into doing magic. It was in San Francisco. There's a little club called the Magic Cellar. It's a jazz club in San Francisco, just south of North Beach, called Earthquake Magoons, Turk Murphy Earthquake Magoons. And the Clute brothers that ran this had discovered, they used to do work on old antique cars. And apparently the story is that one of those cars was up on blocks, fell off, knocked into the side of the garage where they were working on it, hole in there. They looked in, they saw all this stuff in there, which turned out to be ephemera that all belonged to Carter the Great. 20 tons of
Wow.
equipment and paper
Wow.
and posters. And they brought it downstairs from Earthquake Lagoons and created the Magic Cellar. And it was filled with his illusions and paper. And it was just amazing. They contacted his widow, who's apparently still alive, and they bought this whole stuff. So down there in the back room, they had, and all sorts of people came up there. And Daryl came up there, and Max was up there, and Martin Lewis came up there. And I mean, there were just, everybody was in that area. And one day I went up, and in the back room was a guy I'd never heard of, Tony Slidini. And I sat down to watch Tony work, and here this guy was who did nothing. There was not a single move that he made. I'm so used to seeing magicians do moves. There were no moves, but magic just happened. And everything that he did was choreographed to be emotionally consistent, so that everything was justified in a way. And when I lecture, I talk about there being three types of justification: logical, physical, and the third one is emotional. So logical means, you need to get something, so you walk across the room to get it. That's logical. Physical is, if I let go of this, it's going to fall, so it's got to be placed onto the table. So that's happening there. But the emotional is the thing that a lot of us miss. And I watched Slidini do this, and you can see him in his coins across, and you can see a lot of different things. There are moments where he takes beats, where he'll pause and he'll think about something, and the move is motivated by an emotion. I'll give you a quick example of that. When you talked about Chop Cup, it reminded me. At the Magic Townhouse, where I'm resident magician, and Tony would come in. This was years later, and I at one point asked him. I said, "So Tony, how do you justify this move in the Chop Cup where you got to slam the cup down on the table to cover the release of the ball?" He said, "Well, I don't do the Chop Cup." I went, "No, I know you don't, but how would you cover it?" He said, "Well, like this." He took the ball, he dropped in the cup, shook it up, turned it over, set the cup down, and made it move as if the ball went to his pocket, and said, "The ball will now travel from my pocket underneath the cup. Watch it go." Makes a gesture and gestures to the cup, lifts up the cup, and it's not there. And he goes, slams the cup down and says, "Watch again." And does it. He says, "This time I'll go." So this moment, this frustration of it not being there, justified him putting the cup down hard. And I went, "Oh my God, that's brilliant." So this is, these moments of script. There are times when the things that happen in the routine themselves are script. There are times when you will find meaning in the script, and those meanings kind of get discovered by stuff. Snowstorm for me is that way. Heartstrings is that way. Body Snatchers for me, it's about something that's cultural for me. This was at the time when I first wrote it. We were still not that far away from the original black and white version of the Vision of the Body Snatchers science fiction movie. And I saw, what's Wild Card about? I'd watched Tommy Wonder do Tamed Card. I'd met him in Europe. I saw him do this. I went, "This is incredible." This is Peter Kane's Wild Card, but so if I'm going to do Wild Card, I need to do it differently. I need to make changes to it. So finding the context for it. What is it about? What does it mean? It's one thing coming in and taking over and becoming everything else. So the script is sort of becomes developed.
To kind of touch on what you had said earlier about it's what's in the culture sometimes as well that we can draw the parallel to. And you take the trick and you take the imagery of the trick and you just start doing a little bit of a mind map of what all those things may relate to. For me, when I watched Danny DeOrtiz's work, that was the first time that I saw some of Tamariz's writing in action, in a way that really clicked with me. And then I watched even more Tamariz and some other things, and watching a lot of the Spanish magicians, it was very different than North American magicians because of kind of something that you said earlier, or rather, I think that your wife said about it being metaphorical and it not being literal. And I found that A Spanish magic trick was more often about somebody picking a card and it being found, but I had emotions about that it wouldn't be found, or it couldn't be found, or, oh my gosh, the card was lost, or wow, I didn't, whereas North American tricks, and this is a gross oversimplification that's not even true, but, North American tricks are often about the rabbit who goes into the thing, or even just to say, to impose that the king is a royal card and he's more evil, than the other cards. And I think that what happened for me was I got permission to have my magic not be about anything, and that was what it did for me is, it made it that it could be about, like you've been describing, the moment. It could be about, like you were talking about with the example with Darren, it could be about her experiencing something. That's what it's about. It's not, it doesn't say anything about the politics or about the world or about society or about money. It doesn't say anything. It is an isolated moment that we all get to experience together that doesn't exist we don't get to see that in reality, in front of our faces in real time anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you sort of made me think about two separate things. One is Lady Fair and Mr. Smooth, and the other is the Lovelocks, two pieces of mine. In Lovelocks, what it is, it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of ring and box and 7 keys to Baldpate. But as far as the audience is concerned, it's not about the trick. It's basically what it is. So here's the construction of it real quickly. I find a couple who've been married for a long time, as much as I can, and I need to make sure that her ring will come off. So I say, do you still wear a wedding ring? And she goes, yeah. And I say, well, would you take it up and hold it up so everybody can see it? I make a joke about that, and I bring them up onto stage. And I say, have you guys been married a long time? Do you communicate pretty well? And I'll do PK touches with them just to check that out. And I say, okay, so this is a little game that we're going to play here. It's called the Lovelocks. Have you heard of the Lovelocks? The Lovelocks are locks that people take to bridges, and they lock the locks onto the bridge and they throw away the key. So the bridge is covered with thousands of locks and the river is filled with thousands of keys, but there's only one key that matches the lock. And I have here a lock and I have a whole glass full of keys. Your job is to find the right key for this lock. Go ahead, give it a try. He tries twice, fails each time. I take out a little key that's on a ribbon, I drop it in the glass and ask her to try. She, of course, chooses the one on the ribbon and it opens the lock. Okay, so no magic trick there. I said, great, you qualify. You're going to play the game. And I have a prize for you. And your prize is right over here. I take a box and I set it on a little stand. And I say, okay, so this is how the game works. Open up the heart. There's a little heart shape there. She takes that ring, goes off and either goes into a cloth or into a piece of tissue paper, flash paper, and goes into the box, gets locked up. And then the lock gets used to close it up. And I say, it's your job as the romantic man in this case to find the right key to unlock her heart. Well, that would be really simple if you just use the one key she's holding. But it's not. So now it becomes this whole thing where he has to find the right key, and he goes and he eliminates keys and he finds it, gets down, and he tries the keys down to, puts it in the lock, turns it. It doesn't work. I say, of course it doesn't work. But you think that guys get romance? No, not a chance of it. I'll show you how it works. And then I have her choose 2 keys out. She takes 2 out. I say, you give him 1. So he gets 1. He tries it. It doesn't work. I said, yeah, you really think that she's just going to give you the key to her heart? So I said, no. Women, I don't know why it is, but they always keep the key for themselves. Walk over it. And she walks over. She tries the lock and it opens. Now the box gets opened up. Inside, there's a piece of paper. It bursts into flame. The ring is gone. It ends up inside the little box. At the end of the routine, it's reappeared. I hand it back to him. I say, now you can put this back. And there's all sort of byplay. But now you can put it back on her finger the way you did 40 years ago, however many years they've been married. And he's about to put it back on. And I say, and I put down a little pillow on the stage, make him kneel and put the ring back on her finger. And I then take a picture of him on my phone, and I then send them the picture after the show. So in this case, I'm not ostensibly making this trick about things, but in the course of the byplay and the process, there's all sorts of stuff. You can create this imagery of him failing twice, gives you an opportunity to make comments that reflect how you feel about life and about stuff. So it doesn't have to be a script in this sort. This is the story of a man who walked down the street.
For
No,
sure.
you know?
Just needs to be clear what it's about and what it's trying to convey.
Yeah. And the fact is that if you're saying something to somebody and you ask them to do something, what is it that you asking them to do? Does it actually lead somewhere in the script, in the not verbal script, but in the script, the story of the trick, the plot?
I love what you shared about the three questions, the why, the what, and the who, and then the sub questions of those. But there's one that I think stands out as being really important. And I know that it's something that's been important to you, and I know they all are, but this one specifically, and I'd love to hear you talk about it, which is the who are you? And I think that this is something that we often miss in what I know for me, and it's something I still struggle with, as to who I am to the audience, because they only know us for a short period of time. So for me to just be me is wonderful, but it's better for me to be clear about who I'm trying to express who I am to them. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how we can start to think about who we are to our audiences.
Yeah, that's another really, really good question. So I think the who of the audience is also really important, because the who you are is going to change based on who you're performing for. I have this wonderful picture of Bob Sheets working a gig down in Mexico that I've also worked, where he's standing on a table in a pool performing for kids that are swimming in front of him. And, there are very few people in this world that could do that. And Sheets is one of them. He's one of the very few. He's an amazing performer. And he can at the same time work for an upscale dinner club. He can work for, corporate environments. He's got this, but he's got a strong character that's obsessive, and demanding, and has a very strong point of view throughout this. He's able to maintain basically that character throughout all these situations. For me, it changes a little bit. If I'm working for a group of hedge fund managers, it's going to be different. If I'm working for a private party, if I'm working for Peter Schickele, PDQ Bach, for his 80th birthday, it's going to be different. The situation, the material I choose will be different. You have to be careful. So the who becomes kind of dependent a bit on that. That said, who you are in this is also a difficult thing sometimes to work out. So as I told you before, I'd listened to this conversation you'd had with Trig Watson and talking about theater and who it was and how do you choose a character and how do you distinguish yourself from other magicians, and how is it that what defines you as a character and how do you amplify that? Because many of us start with us just being who we are, and I think that's an okay place to be. And in some ways, I think it's better to do that and to follow the improvisational theater rule of yes and, to listen to your audience, embrace what they say to you, and take it a step further. So it becomes a conversation instead of you trying to be a quote unquote character in the midst of a performance. Tom Maurice, in his lectures, he tells the story of being separated from his wife and found a present for his kid. He took the present, he wrapped it in a box, and he wraps it in another box, and he wraps it in another box, and he goes to give it to the kid, and he gets there, and his wife said, "Oh, I'm sorry, the kid's in bed. Just leave it, and I'll give it to him in the morning." And Tom Maurice goes, No, I need to be there when he opens it. And he opens the box, and he watches this progression of this excitement and discovery that happens in there. And he talks about the fact that when he was performing, that he would do a trick and then he would turn around and prepare the next one and then look back at the audience. And he realized that that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to perform it and then to take a beat to really watch the people enjoying what he'd just done. And I realized that a lot of times we don't do that because as we're growing up, we're not very good. And so we turn our backs to protect ourselves from the judgment that we feel is coming to us. So I think it's important when you find your own character to do two things: to be yourself and to be real about this, to talk of, to at least start with this moment of just being present and doing what you're doing and listening to what the audience does and paying attention to what they like and don't like, not being afraid. Don't turn your back on it, but embrace what it is and learn from it, because that'll help you. If you're doing a theater show, I did a show called Radnevsky's Real Magic, which we ran at La Mama and other things, and in that I played a character. And that character needed to be consistent throughout the show, and that affected each of the performance pieces that I did in that show.
I think that's a really helpful way, to think about it. And I love that example where it's such a great way, that story of the gift, where, it really is such a great way to lean into who we are, which is to appreciate the thing that we create, and kind of, sit in that moment and sit with that moment and see how it makes us feel. Right. And I think about a clown. And a clown kind of gets joy out of your joy, like a clown sometimes, or even an evil clown, to think about it, like he laughs at what's happening. His joy comes from that. And I think about that, like us having that fun on stage and enjoying and just sharing the things that we want to be sharing and putting in the world. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask about Monday Night Magic. I know that you have been a producer and you've kind of helped this thing become what it is since the very beginning. Walk us through kind of what the beginning of it was all about, and then some of the highlights from the amazing, history that it's had.
So back in the day, there was the Magic Townhouse, which was Dick and Dorothy Brooks, Dick Brooks and Dorothy Dietrich. Many people came out of that performance-wise. Michael Chout was there. Imam was there. Wesley James was one of the founding folks that was in there early on. Lots and lots of folks came out of it. Then Imam created Mostly Magic, which was down in the Village. And that existed for many years. And then Imam had to close down because of his doctor basically said, for health reasons, you need to stop. You have to do this. And in 1997, Michael Choud, who had tried doing a couple things and had gotten in touch with John Lenihan, who started Monday Night Magic in England, which was a once a month event. The idea behind it was Monday nights is a night when theaters are dark. So theaters will be more than happy to rent you a space at a low cost so you can get started on this. And they're happy to put people in, and people still will come out and see shows. So Michael called up and he said, Magic Townhouse is gone. Mostly Magic is gone. There's no place in New York. I'm thinking about starting Monday Night Magic. And I went, wow, that sounds really great. He said, would you be interested in working on this? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Because New York has no place for people to go to see live magic. There was no other venue. Playboy clubs were closed. There's really just no place for people to go. He said, you haven't asked about money. I said, it doesn't matter. This is about making sure there's a venue, a place where people can go to see magic. He said, you know anybody else? I said, yeah, my buddy Jamie would be great for that. So Michael called up Jamie Ian Swiss and said, I'm thinking about starting this. Would you be interested in helping on this? And Jamie said, are you thinking this is going to make you money, or are you interested in doing a show where there's really high quality? And Michael said, oh, high quality is the most important thing. And Jamie said, right answer, I'm in. And so he brought in Todd Robbins, and a good close friend of Michael's, and a performer who I'd known for many years, is Frank Brentz. And Frank was the other core member. So it was Michael Chout, Frank Brentz, me, Jamie Ian Swiss, and Todd Robbins. And we've lost Frank since then, but the four of us are still the producers of Monday Night Magic. We all work together on selecting who's going to be on the show, making sure that everything's running correctly for its direction and where stuff goes on. So it's a really important thing. We all do our own things, But Monday Night Magic has then been around since 1997. We are now, as of June, we will be entering our 25th year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We are very excited about this. And as Todd says, we're going to keep doing this until we get it right.
Well, from 25 years, I know there must be countless experiences. 25 years of magic in New York is bonkers. Is there a highlight or any other moments like that stick out in your mind as things that you'll never forget?
Yeah, well, so there was the night when both Billy McComb and Jay Marshall were there to perform on our stage. And the two of them were arguing back and forth as to who was going to close, because neither one of them wanted to close. They felt the other should close. And that was just this spectacular evening of stuff. That was back in the Sullivan Street Playhouse. We've been in six or seven different venues over the course of this time.
Wow.
And we've had people from all over the world. My buddy Raymond Crow came up with Colin Cloud, and they came up from when they were doing shows down in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and came into the city and performed for us. We just our friend Cyril Takayama was just in Tokyo, and he said, next when you guys get back opening up, I look forward to coming and performing for you on Monday Night Magic. And I thought, wow, that would be fabulous, But all sorts of folks have come through. It's just been spectacular. We've had something like over 350 different performers that have come through and performed for us. It's just been an amazing experience that is just,
absolutely phenomenal. I'm sure Ben and I have been producing shows here in Toronto,
yes.
And just learning from all the history of magicians who've been producing shows all over the world and what that looks like and what it should look like. So congrats on 25 years of success.
Thank you.
And really impressive.
We look forward to getting
phenomenal.
back up online again. I mean, getting not online, but also
offline.
Exactly. Back on the real boards again.
Absolutely. Before we wrap this up, we're getting towards the end of the episode. There's a couple of wrap-up questions that we ask each of the guests to, basically wrap up every episode. And the first is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be a really, really great addition to the show, someone that would be good for a conversation like this. So the two catches are that we can't have had interviewed them yet, because it's a circle. And the second catch is you have to be able to put us in contact. You can't just say a really famous magician that I can't reach. So who would be a phenomenal addition to this show?
I think that Christian Cagigal could be a very interesting Christian Cagigal, or my buddy Todd Robbins. I don't know if you've had Todd.
Both great, and no, I haven't had Todd, and that'd be phenomenal.
Yeah. So either one of those would be absolutely fabulous. Christian runs the Ghost Walk in San Francisco. He's back and forth. He's done a lot of theater. He works as an actor as well.
Oh, I know Christian.
Yeah.
I know Christian. He's great. He's really wonderful.
Exactly.
That's great. Okay, so the next question is about modern magic. A lot has changed in the world of magic in the last, I used to say, I've been asking this question since before the pandemic, and now it's even more meaningful, to say that a lot has changed in the last 12, 15 months. I would love to know what's one thing about the world of modern magic going on right now that you like, and one thing about the world of modern magic right now that you don't like.
Okay. So I think one of the things that I do like right now is the fact that the focus on social media and on online performances has led to this both exposure, but it's driven us forward. We have had this amazing push to create new effects and new solutions to problems. And simple explanation for that is there was a real expose that happened for online of the double lift. There've been a lot of people that sort of go, oh yeah, this is what this is, So, and I found that there were times when I was in performance of doing this sort of stuff, no matter how good you are, people are suspicious sometimes. So this is a wonderful thing, is that it's forced us into this opportunity and this challenge to create new and better ways to do old things, things that may have been now exposed. So that's
I just want to thank you for a brilliant take on exposure. That's a phenomenal take on exposure. Putting a positive, it is a positive that double lift may have entered the zeitgeist because great, now you have to really know when to use it, and you should find one of the other trillion solutions that you could use to the same problem, and let's get creative. So I really thank you for that.
Sure. Larry Haas called me, published theatrical close-up, republished that in a long time, which, by the way, I promised Richard Kaufman that not only are we going to republish theatrical close-up, which he said he wants to do, plus there's going to be a whole raft of new material.
And what's something you don't like? Yeah, what's something you don't like about the world of magic right now?
So, one of the things that I don't like is this idea that just publishing something doesn't give you the right to perform it. There's this big discussion currently on performance rights, and I know there's been this back and forth on this. Sort of says that, well, I've published this sort of stuff, but you don't have right to actually do this material. I'm just putting it out there for people. And my attitude has always been that if you are publishing a book in magic, it's a how-to book.
Yes.
And it's meant to be used. I'm teaching you this so you can use it. So I don't like there being any question at all about the fact that if I'm publishing a book and putting material out there, then my understanding is that you're going to use it. I understand the reason that, you may not want it done on television. And I think that because that basically spoils it for everybody else that's bought that material or book. They can't do it up there. So there should be some limits on that. But in terms of actually being able to perform it and use it as written, as performed, as taught, it's yours.
That's
so
great.
I don't like there being any question about that.
That's great. The next question is about a take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for a long time now, and they're going to think back to this episode, and hopefully they remember something. They're not going to remember every last detail, but they're going to remember one big concept, one idea, one thing that's the most important. What would you like people to remember when they think back to our conversation?
It's a really good question. And I'd say the one thing is keep asking yourself why. Why am I doing this trick? Why am I doing this routine? Why? And even more importantly, why should anybody care? If you can answer those or even get close to an answer on those, that's the only thing I'd ask you to take away.
I think that's phenomenal. I once heard it said like this: ask why until it hurts. Like you say why, and then you say, oh, because I want this. And you say, well, why that? Well, why that? It usually takes about 6 whys to get to the real thing. So thank you for that. I think asking why are you doing this? Why should people care? And really getting to the bottom of it is awesome.
Yeah. And even if you don't have an answer to that, just the act of asking the question will lead you in the right direction.
The last thing is plugs. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can they find your material? Where can they learn a little bit more about what you're up to? And if you're on tour as well, coming up soon, fingers crossed, where can people learn more about that?
Well, there are a couple of places you can go. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm not much on Twitter, but I'm up there. You can also find me on my website, samelsonmagic.com. The Facebook is probably the easiest thing to do. I'm going to be based out of New York a lot these days. I am doing some traveling down to Nashville for House of Cards, and I'll be out to California and Los Angeles and the San Francisco area, a few other places around, down to Orlando at some point. So the best thing to do is just write me, psamelson@gmail.com is the easiest thing to do, or check me out online.
I love it. And I'll also add that there's a wonderful, wonderful Vanishing Ink masterclass that is out right now that people can go check out. It's really, really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if you liked it, if you learned something, if it was good, if it was nice, then tell someone, share it, tell a friend. I know most people are in a magic club, a magic group, a magic society, and that's kind of the only way that this stuff spreads. So tell a friend. It means the world. Other than that, thanks for being here, and I'll see you next Thursday. Peace.